Welcome to the Stop Over Drinking and Start Living podcast, where high-achieving, goal-oriented rebel women come to learn how to live a vibrant and fulfilling life without requiring alcohol to get through it. No labels, no judgments, no saying you'll never drink again. Just real proven methods to help you stop rebelling against yourself with alcohol so you can drink less and do more. I'm your host, Angela Mascenik. Let's dig in. Welcome to episode 153, Grief During the Holidays with expert on grief, Krista St-Germain. Hello, friends. I'm so excited for this week's episode. I brought in Krista St-Germain, who's a master certified life coach, a grief expert, and a widow, also a mom, to talk to us about grief during the holidays. So many of my clients are having their first holidays right now after losing parents, children, spouses, and it's super painful for them. And I wanted to talk to the expert of somebody who's been through it and who now helps other people get through grief in the most healthiest way possible. So please welcome Krista St-Germain. Again, she's a master certified life coach, a grief expert, widow, mom, and host of the Widowed Mom podcast, which you all should go check out on iTunes and all of the players. When her husband was killed by a drunk driver in 2016, Krista's life was completely flipped upside down. And while it would have been easy to believe her best days were behind her, thankfully, Krista discovered life coaching and posttraumatic growth and was able to move forward and create a future she could get excited about. Now she coaches and teaches other widows so they can love their life again too. Welcome, Krista. Welcome to the podcast, Krista. I'm so excited to have you here.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for thinking of me.
Yes. So the reason why it came up is because literally yesterday, 3 people came on in my group to get coached on grief of children have been lost, siblings, and parents. And, you know, I have my process, right? We were trained in the same organization and of allowing feelings and processing and not judging your feelings and things like that. But I just felt like I wanted to bring in somebody with a little bit more practice with this and personal experience around grief. And so I thought of you, and thank you for being so available.
Well, it was my pleasure. I was happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought that I'd be like, yay, let's talk about grief? But
right. I know. It's like,
yeah.
Should I say this is, I'm excited to have you, but I am. I'm super excited to have you. So everybody, Krista was actually one of my trainers when I got certified as a life coach. It's wild. So fun to see where we are now.
Yeah, I don't think of you. I mean, yes, I know that I was one of your instructors, but yeah, it doesn't feel like that to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like that. You feel like a peer in that way. So.
Well, that's fun.
Fun though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you share with them, maybe your abbreviated story or, how you found this work and a little bit about why you do what you do?
Yeah. So in 2016, I was coming home on a trip with my husband and we had driven separately and I had a flat tire pulled over to the side of the road. He pulled over behind me and he insisted, stubborn man that he was, on changing that tire. Even though we had AAA, he wanted to change a tire. We'll get home faster. I just want to get home. So he went to get the spare tire out of my trunk and we were standing on the side of the highway, right, interstate speeds. And while I was texting my then 12-year-old daughter to tell her that we were going to be late, a man driving who knows how fast, did not brake, did not apparently see us, and slammed into the back of Hugo's Durango and trapped him between his car and my car. Mm. And we later found out that the driver had both meth and alcohol in his system. But, within 24 hours, he was gone, right? And so my whole life was just completely upended. And everything that I thought I had in front of me, really just kind of changed within that 24-hour period. So I had a brilliant therapist actually in my back pocket from years before, and I went immediately to her. That was really helpful to me in terms of getting back to that kind of functioning place and past the early acute grief. But then I kind of got stuck in this, what I now call a grief plateau, where I was okay. I was functioning, right? I was back to work. Everybody was telling me how strong I was and I was doing great, but I didn't feel so great, right? I felt kind of hollow and empty and robotic. And the thing I was worried about that I wasn't really talking about was, I think my best days are behind me. I think that amazing life that I had, it's probably not possible again for me in the future. And it was just kind of at that point where I was trying to figure that out, that I found a life coaching program, right? Same one you found. I had been following Brooke Castillo's podcast, but never really had a life coach. And so I enrolled. Fast forward about 5 or 6 months, crazy powerful experience for me. It offered me, I like tools. I like concrete, tangible things, and that's what coaching gave me. And it was just so powerful that I decided, okay, this is what I want to do for a living, right? I didn't really know at that point that I wanted to help people with grief. I was actually too fresh for me at that point. So it took me getting certified and doing a lot more of my own work and getting coached more to decide that grief really is what I want to do. And so for the last whatever years, it feels like a blur. That's what I do now, is I coach widowed moms specifically. So I'm really interested in post-traumatic growth. I'm really interested in taking a loss and using it as leverage to make life better, right? Not just getting back to the old normal or the new normal or back to where you were before, but really using all of your life experience, even the icky stuff, as fodder for current satisfaction, future satisfaction.
Yeah.
So that's what I do.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And of course, I've told you this before, but I'm so sorry about Hugo and all of that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so am I. And I'm also so grateful. Right. And I think that's one of the things that I used to misunderstand about grief and growth, is that I kind of thought there wasn't going to be room for negative emotion, that if I really wanted, to be happy again, that I would have to just be happy again. And that's one of the most powerful things that I think I have learned, is that there's room for all of it, right? There's room for me to feel sad and miss him and love my life, and they can coexist.
Yes. So can you define post-traumatic growth for maybe people who don't know what that means?
Yeah, right. I remember the first time I heard it, it was like the record just kind of scratched. I was like, wait, what? Post-traumatic what? Because everybody knows of post-traumatic stress, but nobody seems to be as familiar with post-traumatic growth. So it's a term that was coined in the mid-90s by a couple of researchers, Tedeschi and Calhoun. And basically what they were studying is kind of this phenomena of why were there people who, after a trauma, seemed to be more satisfied with life than before the trauma, right? And so what they found is that, because the old idea was that the goal after any sort of traumatic event, which of course is completely subjective and experienced differently by the individual, but the goal after a traumatic event was just to return to that kind of baseline of wellness that the person had experienced before the trauma. And so what these two researchers noticed in their studies was that some people were actually not just returning back to that baseline of wellness, but they were actually increasing their satisfaction in particular areas of life. And so it was a kind of a mind-bendy realization, right? That it wasn't that you could just actually love life in spite of what had happened to you. It was the idea that you could take what happened to you and get more in touch with what you value and what's important to you, and use that information to create a life that is even more satisfying, right? In various areas. So really just redefined what's possible after loss and after trauma.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. And I don't know that my drinking for 20 years was traumatic. I'm guessing that some of it was maybe like micro traumatic in what I thought about myself or what I did or didn't remember and things like that. But that's how I think about my own relationship with alcohol. Like, it wasn't pretty and there was a lot of complications there. But now, because of I had those issues and I worked through them, and I'm a different person on the other side of that, I couldn't be who I am now without going through all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I really encourage people to think about trauma, very subjectively,
Mm-hmm.
because it does not have a textbook definition. What is traumatic for one is not traumatic for another. Sometimes people will use the phrase big T trauma or little T trauma,
Yeah.
right? Meaning that we can think of like a traumatic event, like losing your spouse as a
Right.
big T trauma versus a little T trauma,
Mm-hmm.
which, might be one instance of, emotional abuse or
Right.
something like that. But really it's I think we just want to take caution there and not
Mm-hmm.
limit ourselves to only big events that we associate as traumatic, and really open up our idea of what trauma is.
Yeah. So what happened then? So you found life coaching, you became a certified life coach, and you started helping people just like you move through this.
Mm-hmm.
So what is one of my questions is, I want to ask you about like what we can do as support of like family and friends or coaches or people in the community when somebody loses somebody, and it's the holidays. So like part of this was the holidays, right? Like the holidays are so freaking complicated on so many levels. Add in a fresh loss to the holidays now, and we have the pandemic going on. Like it's so much, right? So that's kind of what I want. Like people maybe not want to come to the holidays, or they may not even know how to respond to you with an invitation. Like as support people in somebody's life who has lost somebody significant, what advice do you have?
Yeah, you're right. There's so much going on with the holidays in general, all these expectations that we have as a culture about how we're supposed to be and feel during the holidays.
Yeah.
And then, if someone that has lost someone, they're probably putting a lot of expectations on themselves too about how they should be feeling. So I think the first thing we want to do is just be compassionate. Not just compassionate with the person, but compassionate with ourselves, knowing that we're probably not going to get it all, quote unquote, right. We are going to maybe say things that later we wish we'd said differently. We are going to do things that maybe we later wish we hadn't done exactly in that way. And so don't try to do it perfectly. Just, do the best job you can. So in terms of inviting someone to something, let it be an open invitation. Right? Let them know that they are welcome and their grief is welcome, right? And that they are welcome at the very last second, right? It's not maybe they don't want to come now, but at the last moment, give them permission to change their mind. Maybe they do want to come now at the last moment. Let them know it's okay to change their mind, right? Because what might feel good to them now might not feel good to them later, and vice versa. But I think letting them know that the totality of who they are, which will include their grief, is welcome in whatever it is that you're doing for the holidays.
Yeah, because I would imagine, and just talking with my own people about this, is that as somebody who's grieving, you might have a judgment against yourself that other people don't want to be around you while you're sad, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's so isolating, right? Yeah. Because you're, and it's different for every person, so I hate to even generalize, but it is a common experience that you are so caught up about how, in how you are feeling, and it seems so gloom and doom to you that you don't want to be the downer, right? But you feel like, in order to be authentic and honest, if you really are experiencing a lot of a negative emotion, that how can you go to, a holiday event and fake it?
Right.
It's really hard. Right? Then conversely, though, we're often putting a lot of expectations on ourselves to feel better than we actually do, right? There's so many shoulds in grief, right? I should be grateful. It's the holidays. I should, be strong for my children and my family. I should be grateful for the time that I had with the person, even though they're not here. I should hold it together. Depends a lot, too, on, what you were taught about emotion growing up. Some people really were never given a role model where a display of emotion was acceptable, right? So some people are really trying to keep it all inside and associating that with strength. There's just so many shoulds and so much going on for people emotionally. I think the more we normalize that emotions aren't problems, the better, right? When we stop, even if we're not going through a grief experience, but when we stop defining success as only times when we're feeling positive emotion, right? And when we embrace that a true rich human experience involves all of the emotions, right? And we make room for that in our own lives, and it becomes easier to make room for that in other people's lives.
And it's
people
like,
sense that.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is even possible for somebody who's grieving, and I don't, and please correct me to use different language. I just don't, because I'm not the expert, but like when I say somebody recently lost somebody, it could be like 2 years ago, right? And like this is the first time they're getting together in person or thinking about getting together in person for the holidays, because last year there wasn't an option to get together because nobody was, right? And so
I'm
that's a
seeing that a
fresh,
lot.
right? That's a fresh
Mhm.
experience, and like going through that grief again in the presence of other people. But what I talk to my clients about a lot is letting those other people, say you're the one with the loss and the grief, and you're uncomfortable, and you're, you might visibly show it, or you may not be smiling all the time, whatever, however it is outwardly that you might present yourself, but also allowing those other people to have their feelings about their experience as well, right? So like if they're uncomfortable with your grief, right? But I don't know if that's even something that somebody with a fresh loss could even think about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we just really want to kind of throw any idea of timelines out the window too, right? Because as much as it is comforting to be able to put people in boxes and assign timelines and linear stages to grief, it's just really not all that representative of the average experience. And so, somebody might have be only a couple of weeks out from a loss and really not be experiencing the amount of negative emotion one might expect them to experience, right? And then somebody else might be a couple of years out, to your point, and it could be really, really hard. I am seeing a lot of that with COVID, where it's easy to think that because the loss maybe happened pre-COVID or maybe towards the beginning of COVID, that person would be in a different place than they actually are.
Right.
But grieving in your house and not being around the people that you love and not having those normal social gatherings, now that we're kind of coming out of that a little bit more, there's a lot of anxiety and stress happening when you haven't seen the people that you're used to seeing. You haven't celebrated the holidays in the way that you're used to celebrating them without your person.
Yeah.
Right. And so not to underestimate that just because somebody looks strong on the outside doesn't mean they're feeling strong on the inside at all.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. Yeah. So the advice for you is to support them with an open invitation, let them be flexible, let them change their mind, verbalize that to them, let them drive what they're doing without any, sort of outward pressure. Like nobody should 100%. Be pressuring anybody anyway to attend a holiday event if they don't want to, right?
We would hope not.
We would hope not, but that's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
But as somebody...
And I think...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, also, like, talk about their person. I think people are so worried about talking about someone who has died. But usually it has the exact opposite impact on the griever, right? Like, we're thinking about it. We're thinking about the person that died. And so when other people express that they're actually thinking about the person that died, that's very comforting.
Yeah.
Because it's not like we're not thinking about it, right? We just feel alone in thinking about it. So I think the more you can tell stories and make, that person a part of the holiday experience, the better.
Yeah. I love that advice. Yeah. Because you're, as the person experiencing the loss, thinking about it a lot, right? And to not feel alone or not to feel so isolated in that process, to know that other people are also thinking or even grieving. Maybe not the same level as you, but are, right? And holding that space for each other. Yeah. Talk to us about buffering during this time with grief, right? Like that's huge in my arena, obviously, for stopping over drinking and the holiday time period and having such dramatic changes in their lives with loss, and add COVID into it. What have you been seeing, or what advice do you give for people?
Yeah, I mean, so when I'm talking about buffering, it of course includes any sort of substance like alcohol or food, but it also includes busying behaviors. A lot of widowed moms struggle with that, and around this time of the year, a lot of widowed moms start struggling with shopping and trying to overcompensate, right? Especially when they have children, right? So they start spending a lot of money and trying to fix feelings with purchases. Social media, of course, also seems to start to get really rampant in terms of buffering.
Mm-hmm.
And my approach or my idea is that, all humans do this, right? So it's not good, bad, right, wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of making sure that we do it consciously and in a way that serves the life experience that we want to create, right? So I'm not anti-buffering.
Mm-hmm.
I am pro-conscious buffering.
Yeah.
Like, let's decide how we're going to spend our time. And also, there's a theory of grief that I like. So, just like anything, weight loss, whatever, there's, as many theories about weight loss as there are about grief, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one of the theories that I like is called the dual process theory of grief. And what it teaches is that we want to kind of oscillate back and forth between doing the work of grief, right? Thinking about your thoughts about the person, feeling the feelings,
Mm-hmm.
and then conscious distraction.
Yeah.
Meaning we can't think about it all the time. We do
Right.
need respite.
Yes.
But we want our respite to be conscious respite as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to unconscious, I can't handle it anymore, so I'm just going to go numb myself,
Right.
and try to get away from it all,
Yeah.
kind of respite.
Yeah. So what does that look like in a day-to-day?
Yeah, it can look like lots of different things. So if there's a particular activity that you kind of get lost in a good way, right? You kind of find yourself in the zone. Maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
writing, or maybe that's painting, or maybe that's crafting, or music, or something
Mm-hmm.
that you just are naturally attracted to, gardening.
Mm-hmm.
Those can be beautiful breaks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But even just laughter and time with family and, watching a movie or just doing something that gets your brain off of the seriousness of life and loss
Mm-hmm.
and into kind of a relaxed, calm mode is
Mm-hmm.
is valuable. I am also a really big fan of tapping, emotional freedom technique.
Yeah.
And so I recommend that as well for people. It's not exactly the hobby that a lot of us associate with respite, but it does give our nervous system a break.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes some, conscious action to give that gift to ourselves too.
Yeah. The things that you mentioned, though, and I can't remember exactly what the term was, but they don't have like a net negative impact on your health, like gardening
Yeah.
and painting and family time and stuff like that. Like, there's some things that we look for as a respite, like drinking or overeating, that we tend to want to do. So, like, if somebody has started that pattern, like maybe drinking or numbing out in front of the TV, like it's a dual thing, like TV and food, or TV, food, and alcohol. How do you help them reintroduce more of those healthier things that don't cause that negative on the other side, right? So
Yeah.
like in the morning, when I
Yeah.
think about the net negative, it's like, not only are you still left with your negative emotions that you didn't be with in that time, now you have the negative emotions of what you did, right? So it's like, I
Right.
call it the shit compactor
Yeah.
experience.
Oh, I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two parts to that question. So the first part to me is really getting curious about what are we avoiding in the first place with that behavior, right? Because it's a feeling, it's an emotion. So what is it? Because personally, I was never really taught much about feelings.
Mm-hmm.
When I came to coaching, I didn't have a particularly expansive awareness or vocabulary about what was happening in my body in terms of emotions. And so that's curiosity, right, is what helps us figure that out. So are we avoiding anxiety? Are we avoiding sadness? Are we avoiding loneliness? What is it that we're actually trying to avoid? And then once we figure it out, can we get curious about what it's actually like in our bodies? So when I'm coaching, I actually ask clients, I teach a process called Now, and I ask clients to use that process 100 times, right? To feel 100 feelings, right? So the Now process that I use is name, open, witness, NOW. So name the emotion. So this is sadness, right? And that's actually the least important part of it. We don't even have to give it a name. I'm feeling something, right? It's like noticing that it's there, but if we can name it, that's great. And then opening up to it, which is just like saying yes to it, because most of us don't know how to say yes to a feeling, right? We know how to say no to it by grabbing a drink or, grabbing Instagram, but we don't actually know how to say yes to it. So just like we would say yes to a labor pain, because we know that's not going away unless we allow it, right? Say yes to whatever the feeling is, open up to it, physically open, right? Like bring your chest forward and breathe into it. and then witness it. Where is it in your body? What is it like? What is the felt experience in your body of that sadness? And if we do that enough times, and I'm sure, you probably teach something pretty similar to that, we get a whole different experience of it, such that it's not the boogeyman under the bed that most of us think that a negative emotion is. And then when we realize, oh, actually what I'm really trying to make go away is this, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach that's buzzing around and, sinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then we allow it to pass, and it's not such a big deal.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. But then also, how do we get to a new behavior? I say schedule it. Right? Schedule that stuff. So what is it? And maybe you don't know what it is that brings you pleasure. And I certainly know that a lot of my clients struggle with this because, they're kind of really trying to figure out who they even are without their person. Yeah. And it can get tricky, right? Mm-hmm. It can be hard to figure out, what do you like in the absence of this person when this person may have been the majority of your life. Yeah. Right. And so it can be just a process of, okay, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to experiment. What does bring me joy? Because we learn by doing. So let's try some stuff and let's schedule it so that we will go and try it. So do I want to go try, some sort of artistic endeavor? Do I want to schedule some sort of outdoors thing? Like, what do I actually want to schedule so that I can figure out what brings me pleasure that isn't covering up something negative?
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I teach the very, very similar concept. So we can't do anything unless we get aware, right? So you have to be willing to give yourself enough of a break there whenever you find yourself buffering with alcohol or food or Netflix or whatever it is, to ask yourself those questions, right? So name it, describe it, be conscious of it, and then let it, process it, and then you can decide more after you've let that process what you can do from a more clear mind and more open mind, because when you're in the process of it, you're flooded with those emotions, and we generally don't come up with ideas to do in those moments, right? So I say, make a list of things that you want to do outside of those emotional times that you might notice and patterns and things throughout your day, so that when you are in the throes of it, you can remind yourself, okay, this is the time where I might have wanted to do this instead of drink, instead of going to the cabinet.
Yeah. And if you can schedule those things, because I know we're the worst, typically women, right, about putting ourselves first and making self-care a priority. Mm-hmm. And self-care doesn't just mean bubble baths and massages, right? But things that fill our spirits, scheduling those things, or at least figuring out time to devote to experimenting if we don't know what they are. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then we have that conscious respite, intentional respite built in.
Mm-hmm. So what do you tell people? So a lot of my clients are working on this. They joined the program maybe because they had a death in the past, 5-10 years ago. Yeah. And they started drinking from that place, right? They never really dealt with these emotions. So now that they're not drinking as much, they're left with the real truth of what's happening for them in their lives, right? And so sometimes they tell me that they're just I felt it all day. There just became a point where I just couldn't be with it anymore. And so sometimes they might go to bed, or they, end up drinking or something like that. So what advice do you have for people that are just I've done the thing, I've processed, I've named it, I've recognized it, I've gone through that, and it's still there and it's terrible?
So a couple of things come to mind. It's still there and it's terrible. So as much as it seems like a feeling lasts a long time, it really doesn't. It's really actually a cycle that just happens very quickly and we don't notice that it's happening. So thoughts cause feelings, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're really allowing a feeling to pass, it doesn't take all that long when we are in our body and noticing the feeling and not attached to the thought. What happens that we don't notice is that we get hooked on the thought. And so we might be allowing the emotion for a little bit, but then we're really still hooked on and continuing to think that thought. Mm-hmm. And so we're just over and over and over thinking the thought, creating the feeling, allowing the feeling, thinking the thought, creating the feeling, allowing and we aren't really changing the pattern. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, right, if it's an ongoing thing, I think there's two things. One is, do we know the thought causing the feeling? right? Because if we don't know the thought causing the feeling, how are we going to change our thinking? How are we going to unhook ourselves from that thought, right? And it's not even a matter of not, making sure that thought never comes up again. It's a matter of heightening our awareness to the point that when we notice ourselves being hooked by that thought, we can spit the hook out of our mouths like a fish, right? And we go, oh, this is the thought that makes me feel hopeless, right? And it's easy for me to get hooked on, but that's not the only thought available to me. So I can choose a new thought, right? And then we can work on how that happens. So we can use thought ladders and bridge thoughts and other ways of, instilling positive thoughts that we would really like to believe that maybe aren't so readily available all the time. So that's one thing. And for me, the other thing is tapping. And are you
I've done it. I've done it in like a group exercise, but I've done it not on a regular basis.
I am telling you, I just love it so much. There's something so, when you are kind of flooded or hijacked to the point where, your emotions are high enough that it becomes difficult to think. The thinking part of your brain just isn't so accessible. Yes, for sure. We can, follow the now process or, other iterations or variations on that theme. But there's something so calming about tapping to your nervous system, right? It's just like an off switch to your body's stress response. And so for me and for most of my clients, a few rounds of tapping, you will literally feel the emotion leave your body and your shoulders drop. And you will then have access to the part of your brain that allows you to think about your thinking in the first place. And so to me, it's more and more my go-to, right? And it's so easy to do, and you don't need to pay anyone to have, to learn it. It's just so easy to just, this is sadness. And you just tap on all the points. Like, even though I'm sad, it's okay for me to love and accept myself anyway, right? And you set it up that way. And then you tap through the points. This is sadness in my heart, sadness in my stomach, wherever it is, right? And you just acknowledge the truth, right? Which is that whatever the emotion is in your body. You're not trying to make it go away. You're just allowing it to be there. Studies show that cortisol levels drop just while you're tapping, right? Your stress levels drop. And I find that to be just a really organic way.
Yeah. I mean, it just gives yourself a break from thinking too. Like, that is a technique that just like gets you out of your head and focus on your body, it sounds like.
Right. And it's such an honest technique, right? We're not trying to force anything. We're not trying to change anything. It really just is about allowing the truth of what is for you in that moment and letting it flow through your body and letting it pass.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
I love it. Thank you. So this is a kind of a weird question, so just bear with me as I ask it. But like, how do you define success for a woman that would go through your program as a widow? Like, how do you measure if they've improved or not? Right? So like, if grief isn't supposed to be like a process, or like not everybody's supposed to follow this thing, like, what do you say to people? Like, what is the outcome of somebody working with somebody like you on a regular basis or in your program that they can expect at the end?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few things that come to mind. So a lot of my clients are struggling with purpose and vision, right? So have we kind of worked through that, right? It's really easy to believe that you don't know who you are when your person dies, right? When your whole identity or sense of self has been wrapped up in that role, or your whole vision for your future has been included that person. Can we figure out who you are and what you want in the future, or at least what you value, and use that as the compass? So that's part of it. A huge part of it is the emotional component, right? Have we learned how to allow feelings to pass without resisting, reacting, avoiding? And have we learned how to create them on demand, right? Those are two huge things. And then there's the mind management piece, which is, do we understand the patterns that exist, right? The thought, feeling, action patterns that exist in the areas that matter to us, right? And have we changed the ones that we want to change? But that doesn't mean we're now only thinking and feeling positively.
Right.
Like, I still choose to believe that I miss Hugo.
Yeah.
I don't want to not believe that. right? It doesn't make me feel amazing.
Right.
But it's how it feels appropriate to me, and it's how I want to feel. I still don't want to be happy that he died.
Right.
Right. But what happens is that we go from like unconscious patterns, right? Patterns without intention, just being hooked on thoughts and hooked on patterns, to pivoting towards choosing patterns on purpose that line up with the values and vision that we have for our lives, right? And that won't always be thought swapping to the positive.
Right.
Right. Sometimes that will still be keeping thoughts that make us feel negative emotions, but then we can, keep those thought feeling patterns without acting from those emotions.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Which goes back to the whole allowing feelings part of it. Can I say, okay, yes, I do want to feel sad about this. And I no longer have to act from sadness because I know how to let sadness be part of my experience, and I don't need to cover it up. Yeah. I don't need to avoid it. Right. Yeah. I don't need to act from it. And then another piece for me is just the self-confidence piece, right? Is because you wouldn't think, I have this conversation so many times, I have to tell you, you wouldn't think that self-confidence takes such a hit when you lose someone significant. Most people don't associate self-confidence with grief, but it is a big deal, right? Because a lot of us don't realize, especially with a significant other, how much we were leveraging their belief in us. Right? How much we were leveraging our belief in us as a partnership.
Yeah.
And so we really have to go back and break down, where does self-confidence come from? What is it? How do I create that for myself?
Yeah.
Right?
I can imagine that would
I remember
be
the first time I was talking to Carla and one time about it, and she was like, confidence, right? She's a confidence coach for feminist women. She's like, why do women struggle with confidence after the loss of a spouse? They're like the same person. I'm like, it's one of the biggest issues that most of us have.
I mean, I can imagine if I were to lose my husband now, he is my biggest cheerleader. That would be a hole for sure. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, and then decision making.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It sounds to me like it's empowering. Like as a woman who would work with you, right? Like to go from being powerless or maybe not feeling like you're in control of your feelings and taking action from that place, but to understanding yourself more, that your feelings aren't a problem. You get to direct them, you get to choose them, and it's more of an empowered type place to be, and you can choose where you go from there, from that place, more than from the beginning.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And also recognizing, I think this is really important too, recognizing that happiness that you felt in the past, right? You created that.
Yes.
It didn't happen to you. Right? That relationship that you were in, you created that. It didn't just happen to you, right? So all of these things that you thought caused your satisfaction in life before didn't, right? You created that for yourself. And when we can take 100% responsibility for what we have created in the past, because most of us just think that the good stuff just happened to us. Well, we're more than happy to blame ourselves for the quote unquote bad stuff, right? But we just think the good stuff just floated down the river and somehow we got lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. But if we can stop and go, no, actually, I created that, right? I was the one that had those thoughts about that person. I was the one that had those thoughts about that relationship. I'm the one that took action to put myself in that position in the first place. Then we can start to realize that if we were powerful enough to do it then, we're powerful enough to do it now.
Yes. I love that. I kind of did the opposite of you. I have a therapist now, but I started with life coaching, and we talk so much about feelings. It's great. It's my jam. But it's like, I think about like the periodic table of elements, and all of these elements are different emotions. And we always they kind of like lay a blanket on top of your head. This is how I think about it. And we always have all of the feelings all of the time. They're always there. So happiness for your clients is there. It's just not activated right now in this maybe moment or in this holiday season or at this event, right? But it's there within you. You're born with it, right? So
the capacity for it.
You have it. You didn't lose it. It didn't go away. It's there. It's just dormant maybe for this time period until you learn through your tools, it sounds like, how to get back to that place of, and of course it's not always happy. We know that it's not about being happy, but like what you're saying, it's about being in control and being empowered and activating the feelings that you want to have and choosing the negative ones on purpose when they come in as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Like being the conscious creator
Yes.
of this life experience.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean fluff and good stuff all the time.
No, not at all. So any other final advice for people who have experienced loss or in grief, or, even if they've lost somebody 10 years ago and they're in the holidays right now, like any final advice or tips to give them?
Yeah, I would just say ignore pretty much everything pop culture has ever taught you about grief. Right? Like, even the 5 stages of grief, people latch onto that one. And, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler, who created it, right? They were originally studying hospice patients. It was really about the process of dying, not the process of grieving a loss. Mm-hmm. They never intended for it to be interpreted in such a literal way, right? People think, well, first I have to be in denial, and then I must be angry, and have to bargain, and no, right? That can be a part of your experience, but it doesn't have to be. So whatever it is you're feeling, it is not a problem, and it is part of grief, and that includes all the negative emotions and all the positive ones too, right? There's no timelines. It doesn't go away. There's no pot of gold at the end of a rainbow where we are through our grief, right? Mm-hmm. It's just whatever life experience is, we fold it into the fabric of who we are and take it with us. But it's not something we need to get over, move past. It's just part of being human on the planet, and you can't do it wrong.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. How can people find you?
You're welcome. So I also have a podcast. It's called the Widowed Mom Podcast. And people are welcome to listen to it, even if they are not widowed moms. If they are interested in grief or post-traumatic growth, they might like it. And then also coachingwithkrista.com is my website. And then all the social connections are there.
And you have is it a small group coaching program for women?
Yeah, it's just for widowed moms, small group coaching just for widowed moms. But I try to make the podcast a little bit more broad to help more people.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your work. That was extremely helpful for so many. And my listeners and my clients will love it and love you. So go follow Krista and all the things, and we'll link up her websites and socials in the show notes as well. But thank you again so much. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Oh, we love Krista. Thank you again, Krista, for coming on the podcast. And if you want to learn more about her, click through the show notes, go subscribe to her podcast, go check her out on the socials. She's amazing in helping so many women feel empowered with the grief that they've had after losing their loved one. So, and I just wanted to add, if you are feeling grief during the holidays, it's okay. And you don't have to go do all the things, and you can show up exactly the way you are and say no and change your mind at the last minute, and it's all okay and you're okay. And this is part of your process, and it doesn't have to look like you think it should or what anybody else thinks it should. You get to be with it and however you need to be with it. So I love you all, and I will talk to you next week.